Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're here again to really plunge into some fascinating sources and pull out the key ideas. And today, wow, we've got a really interesting one. We're taking a journey into the mind of Alan Watts. We'll be exploring his pretty profound observations on what makes societies insecure, and also how we as individuals kind of navigate this path to freedom, or sometimes how we completely misunderstand it.
It's a fantastic topic. Really timely, I think.
Absolutely. So our main source for this exploration today is from the VCrown Podcast. They have this great audio piece called Insecure Societies and Hermits.
A really rich discussion.
It really is. It unpacks Watts's views on, the subtle ways society pressures us, how we tend to conform, even when we think we're rebelling.
It's a big one.
Yeah. And the surprising, perhaps, these pitfalls that can catch us out, even when we're looking for liberation outside the mainstream.
Right? When you think you've escaped.
Exactly. So our mission today is to sort of pull back the curtain on all this. We'll be asking, why are some societies so incredibly intolerant of people who don't play the game?
The nonconformists, yeah.
And maybe more subtly, how do we, when we're searching for freedom, stumble into these little traps, these things that look like liberation but are maybe just another set of rules?
Yeah, maybe disguised.
Even when we're sure we're breaking new ground.
Okay.
Let's unpack this. Let's see what Watts has to teach us here.
It's definitely crucial stuff.
Yeah.
Especially now, you feel this sense of insecurity everywhere, people searching for more authentic ways to live. And what's amazing is how Watts's insights, even though they're from a different time, they resonate so clearly with what we're facing today. He saw these patterns, these timeless human patterns.
He really did. Okay, so let's start with Watts himself. Alan Watts, a really remarkable figure, wouldn't you say?
Definitely.
An autodidact, largely self-taught, which is always impressive, and he gained a lot of recognition, especially during the hippie era.
Right, the 60s and 70s.
But what's key, I think, is that Watts wasn't just in it. He wasn't just swept up. He was this incredibly sharp observer, almost detached, watching these countercultural waves happening.
Yes.
Trying to understand their deeper meanings and, crucially, their often, unintended consequences, like a philosopher mapping out this new territory.
That's a perfect way to put it. And the source, the VCrown audio, really digs into how complex that hippie era actually was. It wasn't just one thing.
Right, not monolithic at all.
No. It was a time of intense experimentation. You had people exploring psychedelics, for example, trying to expand consciousness, break free from, everyday reality.
Seeing different ways of seeing.
Exactly. And alongside that, meditation took off massively. People looking for inner peace, maybe new spiritual frameworks outside traditional religion, a deeper connection. But the source uses this powerful Spanish term, desfes. It means this radical break, this kind of uncontrolled departure from the old norms.
Ah, okay. So not just rejecting, but maybe leaping without looking.
Sort of, yeah. It was a societal upheaval. Old structures, old beliefs were being aggressively challenged, but maybe without a clear idea of what came next.
Which creates both freedom and chaos, disorientation.
Right. Precisely. Both exhilarating freedom and this profound sense of societal freefall. And Watts watched all of this very carefully. That uncontrolled part is key because it could, as Watts saw, lead to new kinds of conformity down the line.
Ah, interesting. Replacing one set of rules with another, even unintentionally.
Exactly. And you have to remember, Watts wasn't alone in this. The source mentions other huge figures from that time who were shaping the conversation.
Like who?
Well, Stanislav Grof, the transpersonal psychologist exploring non-ordinary states. Timothy Leary, obviously advocating psychedelics.
Tune in, drop out.
Right. And Ram Dass, who went from psychedelic experiences to becoming this revered spiritual teacher, bridging East and West. And you can't forget someone like Maria Sabina, the Mazatec healer. Her traditional use of psilocybin mushrooms brought this whole indigenous perspective into the mix.
Wow. Yeah, so a real ferment of ideas and practices.
Totally. It was this intense period of questioning, seeking, this deep need to break free from what felt like a rigid, suffocating mainstream society. Just massive exploration.
And what's so fascinating and really relevant for you listening right now is how that whole period, that context, still echoes today. It's not just history.
Not at all.
When you look at how people search for meaning now, or for belonging, or even these so-called alternative lifestyles.
Like digital nomads or minimalism.
Exactly. Or new spiritual communities. You see the same impulses. People are still trying to opt out, find different paths, challenge norms that feel empty.
The search continues.
Understanding that hippie era through Watts helps us see the roots of our own contemporary searching. It shows the drive for liberation and the potential pitfalls are kind of timeless.
Absolutely.
So how did Watts actually describe these people who were opting out back then, the ones who walked away from the conventional game?
Well, he had this great term, the non-adherence. It perfectly captures their deliberate detachment.
Non-adherence, I like that.
Yeah. And some people might have just called them beatniks, from that earlier movement. But Watts went deeper.
How so?
He noticed they weren't usually working class folks fighting economic battles. Often, they were people who'd actively left institutions like university.
Okay, why? What was the reason?
Because they felt there was no herber there. That's the word the source uses. It's like a vital spirit, an essential energy, a real spark. They felt the institutions were just sterile, disconnected.
Wow, no herber. That resonates, actually. You hear similar things today about traditional education paths, don't you?
You absolutely do. People questioning the value, the cost, whether it really prepares you for life or even the modern job market.
Yeah.
So Watts saw these non-adherents cultivating a very specific lifestyle. They had this real disdain for mainstream tastes.
Like what kind of things?
Oh, the obsession with having the right car, the perfectly manicured lawn as a status symbol, needing tons of appliances.
The consumer dream.
Exactly. They preferred simplicity. Minimizing complications, rejecting materialism. They wore practical clothes, like jeans, which was a statement back then.
A rejection of formality.
Right. Unpretentious, down to earth. They wanted to live, as the source puts it, de una manera no complicada, in an uncomplicated way, prioritizing experience over stuff.
Intentional simplicity.
Right.
A direct pushback against that growing consumer culture. So how did, local shops react to these people who suddenly didn't want their usual products?
That's a great question. Watts noticed that. Initially, local businesses were a bit bewildered, maybe felt displaced. Here were people who just didn't buy the usual things.
Yeah. Created an economic disconnect.
Yeah. But what's really insightful is how that dynamic has evolved. Watts saw the beginning, but now it's transformed.
How so?
What was maybe a local disruption back then has become these hyper-specialized, often digital niches today.
Ah, right. Catering to very specific tastes.
Exactly. You see it everywhere. Online groups for extreme minimalists, brands just for one ethical niche, specific lifestyles.
So even in rejecting the mainstream market.
They create a new market, a new economic ecosystem built around their specific nonconformist preferences. They're still consuming, just differently. Maybe more consciously, maybe not, but still participating.
That makes total sense. You reject one system, but you kind of build another one, maybe without even noticing. Which leads us right into Watts's next big idea, the insecurity of societies themselves.
Yes. This is really core Watts. Yeah. He argued that insecure societies are the least tolerant of those who don't join.
Okay, unpack that. Why?
Because the intolerance doesn't come from strength or certainty. It comes from the society's own deep insecurity about its own rules, its own validity.
So if they were truly confident,
they wouldn't care so much if a few people opted out. They wouldn't need everyone to sign on to feel okay about themselves.
Yeah.
But if the foundations feel shaky,
then the nonconformist is a threat.
A huge threat. Because their non-participation implicitly questions the whole system. It's like holding up a mirror to the society's own doubts.
Yeah.
And that's deeply uncomfortable.
Right. It makes the society feel unstable.
Exactly. So the consequence is this desperate insistence. Everyone must play the game. It's not about genuine belief. It's about demanding compliance just to shore up their own fragile sense of legitimacy.
They need everyone in the machine to prove the machine is real.
Perfectly put. Anyone refusing to play is a direct challenge to the collective illusion. It's like saying the emperor has no clothes, and insecure societies just can't handle that.
And this brings us to that really tricky concept Watts talked about, the double bind.
Oh, yes. The psychological trap.
Explain that. It's kind of a mind bender.
It really is. Watts put it so well. You are required to do something that will be acceptable only if you do it voluntarily.
Okay, wait. Required.
Right.
But it only counts if it's voluntary.
Exactly. It's a total paradox, a no-win situation. You must conform, you must believe, but that conformity only works, it's only acceptable if it seems like it came freely from your heart.
Like saying, you absolutely must love me, but only if it's spontaneous.
Precisely. It creates this impossible internal conflict. You're trapped. So what does this mean for you, the listener? How does this show up in everyday life, not just big movements.
It's surprisingly common, isn't it? Like at work, maybe. You're told, be a team player, show initiative, think outside the box. But then your initiative is only really valued if it fits the existing plan, if it doesn't rock the boat too much.
Right, if it's the right kind of initiative.
Or in families, just be yourself. But then you get subtle pushback if yourself doesn't quite match the family expectations or unspoken rules.
Seen that happen.
Even small social things. Feeling you have to laugh at a joke you don't find funny just to belong or avoid awkwardness. It forces a performance.
Instead of genuine connection, Watts saw this double bind everywhere in insecure systems. The key is, freedom isn't just escaping external rules. It's untangling these internal knots, too.
That's powerful, and it leads right into another critical point Watts made, the danger of falling into new dogmas.
Yes, he was really sharp on this. How people reject old systems, traditional religion, conventional lifestyles, whatever.
Yeah, they feel liberated.
Right. But then they fall into a similar trap by adopting new rules, new dogmas that are just as rigid.
The cambio de cromos, the source mentioned, swapping cards.
Exactly. You swap one set of cards for another. Maybe it looks nicer, more colorful. The source says telita de colores, a colorful new fabric. But you end up in la misma trampita, the same little trap. The new identity binds you just as tightly, maybe even more sneakily. Just changing the outward form doesn't guarantee freedom if that need for certainty is still there.
Right. The source gave some great examples. People ditching established religion.
Yeah, feeling free.
But then immediately jumping to another band, another group, maybe another yogi store, or the alternative supermarket of the yogi, seeking a new source of answers.
And the problem isn't the new path itself necessarily. It's the tendency Watts saw to arrogues la verdad, to arrogantly claim absolute truth in that new context.
So my new way is the only way.
Exactly. You insist your new path is the definitive answer for everyone. You've just swapped one dogma for another, often with the same intolerance for anyone who chooses a different new path, believing you've found the answer when maybe you've just changed the question you're clinging to.
So that's where critical thinking is just vital.
Absolutely paramount.
Yeah.
Questioning old norms is valuable, yes. But Watts warns us, be just as critical, maybe even more so, of the certainty with which new truths are embraced.
Don't just accept them without scrutiny.
Right. That impulse to find a new absolute can be just as limiting. True freedom, for Watts, seems to be more about the process of questioning, exploring, staying fluid, not just finding a new set of answers to hold on to rigidly.
The freedom is in the ongoing inquiry itself.
I think so. And this relates to another tendency Watts flagged, always looking outward for blame, externalizing responsibility.
Yes. Instead of looking at our own part in things.
Exactly. We focus on an external enemy, could be a political party, another country, some group, whatever, rather than acknowledging our personal and collective role in how things are.
It's easier, I guess.
Much easier. It's a defense mechanism. But the source echoes Watts. We are all responsible for what happens in our environment. Our reality is the sum total of our choices and actions, yet we constantly point fingers elsewhere.
Avoids that hard self-reflection.
Totally. And this externalizing connects to those bigger societal influences the source talks about, like beyond just military power.
Right, things like advertising, media, cultural narratives.
Exactly. The source mentions the U.S. influence globally, not just politics, but through culture. Think about the square-jawed superhero archetype.
Like the action hero model.
Yeah, it's permeated everywhere. Europe, India, you name it. It presents this specific image of heroism, good versus evil, individual might solving everything.
Seems harmless on the surface.
But it subtly shapes how we see the world, how problems get solved. It reinforces the idea that solutions come from powerful external figures, not from within or collectively. It kind of encourages that external blame game.
Interesting, a subtle imposition of rules.
And what's key is this habit of blaming externally. It's not left-wing or right-wing. It's just human, a fundamental tendency.
Yeah.
Governments do it, institutions do it, counterculture movements do it. Finding an other to blame lets us avoid the tough work of self-reflection and shared accountability. Keeps us reacting, not creating change.
And building on that idea of subtle conformity, there's that great line from Erich Fromm referenced in the source.
Oh yeah, that's brilliant.
We all wear the same clothes in some way, differentiated by groups.
It's so insightful. Even in groups that seem diverse or alternative, there's usually a shared aesthetic, shared values, common jargon. It acts like a subtle uniform.
Not literal uniforms, but shared norms.
Right. You leave one uniform, maybe the corporate suit, but you implicitly adopt another.
Like what?
Well, the source uses a simple food example. Rice being central in Filipino culture versus bread in Spain. It creates a shared identity. And it applies just as much to alternative movements. You might reject mainstream fashion, but then maybe everyone in your new group wears a certain brand of ethical clothing, or eats vegan, or listens to the same obscure music.
It creates a new filter, new expectations for belonging.
And potentially new ways to exclude people who don't fit the new mold. It's that Wattsian point again. Freedom isn't just swapping one group's norms for another.
These patterns repeat. Watts also drew parallels to historical examples, didn't he? Like monks and nuns.
He did, and the source explores this. Christian monks and nuns withdrew from society, seeking detachment, right?
Yeah, ostensibly.
But the source offers a critique. Despite being withdrawn, these institutions often held immense power. They dictated fundamental beliefs, even controlled education.
So, physically separate, but still hugely influential.
Exactly. It raises questions about what true detachment really is. Sometimes withdrawing just shifts the form of control or influence.
And you see that today too, right? People rejecting traditional institutions.
Only to embrace new, often highly commercialized versions of spirituality or community. Absolutely.
They leave one system they see as flawed, but jump into another that might have its own subtle controls, its own new dogmas, maybe hidden behind a wellness label.
It's the same little trap, just rebranded. And the source gives some really pointed examples of how profound things get.
Wow.
Trivialized, desacralized, like tantric sex. The source says it gets disguised as a cute little thing to sell it.
Taking something complex and deep.
And stripping it down, packaging it for mass appeal, maybe losing the core meaning entirely. More about marketing than transformation.
And psilocybin too.
Yeah, a similar critique. The source acknowledges the promising research for stress, anxiety, depression. That's real and valuable.
Sure.
But it also says the path has carried forward a lot of people, meaning maybe too many people jumping in without proper understanding, guidance, or respect for these powerful substances.
Leading to unintended consequences.
Potentially. When experiences that were once sacred or used carefully in ritual get commodified or treated casually, they lose their depth. It becomes spiritual consumerism, risking harm and missing the real potential. That vulgarization is exactly what Watts would have warned about.
It all seems to circle back to control mechanisms, doesn't it? And fear seems like a big one.
Huge. As Watts and the source make clear, fear is used by everything that has to do with power. It's universal.
Doesn't matter if it's a shaman, a government.
Or even psychology or psychiatry, the source notes. Fear is presented as just incredibly effective for controlling populations. It bypasses logic, hits our survival instincts.
Makes people act against their own interests, maybe.
Or blindly follow leaders, cling to ideologies, just seeking safety.
And it's not just fear, right? The source mentioned other desires being exploited.
Yeah. Sex, obviously, but also just general desire for connection, novelty, belonging. And that intense longing, the anhelo, for unattainable wealth.
Like those manuals for abundance.
Exactly. Promising you can manifest mansions worth millions. It taps into deep cravings for security, status, escape from feeling less than.
These deep unmet needs create a vacuum.
A vacuum that power structures or commercial interests are very good at filling or exploiting.
And Watts saw this, leading people to constantly jump. What was the phrase? The cofradia and cofradia.
Yes, from one fraternity to another. This endless search, group to group, guru to guru, system to system.
Looking for external solutions.
Always looking outside for something. Validation, answers, fulfillment that Watts would say can only really be found within. It creates dependency.
Keeps you trapped in that cycle.
Until you address the internal source of the seeking, you just keep finding new versions of the same trap.
And this really brings us to those concrete examples of how even alternative lifestyles get swallowed by commerce. The source mentions the irony of moving from the old Whole Foods.
Which then got bought by Amazon.
Right, the ultimate symbol of mainstream commerce. And then you go to the ecological market.
Where an artichoke costs €7.
It's insane. Pomegranates, avocados, lemons, all ridiculously overpriced. This is supposed to be the conscious choice.
It just becomes another form of consumerism, often incredibly expensive and exclusionary. The desire for natural or ethical living gets co-opted immediately.
You're not escaping the market, you're just in a pricier section.
Exactly. The underlying game of desire and consumption hasn't changed a bit.
And this ties back to that subtle conformity too, maybe even a fear of real questioning, like with the psilocybin users the source mentioned.
Yeah, that was a really critical point. Many groups using it tend to align with a specific political tendency.
Okay.
But here's the kicker. Their experiences, even though profound, often just reconfirm their existing ideas. They don't really challenge them or open them up to genuinely different perspectives.
So instead of breaking down barriers, it reinforces the echo chamber.
It seems so. In many cases, it points to this underlying mito, this fear of truly questioning fundamental beliefs, even during what's supposed to be a liberating journey.
Wow, using a tool for introspection to just confirm what you already think.
It's a powerful example of how even potentially liberating tools can be subtly used to avoid discomfort, to avoid genuine questioning, keeping you safely inside your existing worldview, still in that trap.
Okay, wow. This deep dive, guided by the VCrown discussion on Watts, has really covered some ground. We've seen how insecure societies become intolerant, imposing that double bind.
That demand for voluntary compliance, yeah.
And how the search for freedom can lead us right into new dogmas, just swapping one set of rules for another.
The cambio de cromos.
Exactly. And we looked at that tendency to blame externally, ignoring our own responsibility.
And how conformity creeps in even within alternative groups. From Daegum's idea of different uniforms.
Right. Plus, how fear and desire are used for control, and how even wellness becomes this commercialized trap, sometimes reinforcing biases instead of freeing us.
I think the biggest takeaway from Watts here, the most crucial thing, is the need for constant critical thinking, relentless self-awareness.
It's not enough just to reject the mainstream.
No. You have to be just as critical, maybe more critical, of the new paths, the new truths you're drawn to. Ask yourself, am I really questioning or just swapping cards for a prettier deck? Am I ending up in the same little trap?
Am I embracing this because it challenges me or because it just comfortably confirms what I already believe out of fear of real, unsettling questioning? So the final thought for you, listening. What does this all mean for you? How do you spot those subtle pressures, both mainstream and alternative? How do you notice the new rules disguised as freedom? And maybe most importantly, how can you cultivate that ability to truly question, not just reconfirm what you think you know, what you're told, what you choose to believe?
Because Watts seems to remind us that real freedom, maybe it's not about joining the right group or finding the perfect external system.
Maybe it's more about that deeper, honest, ongoing inquiry into ourselves. Choosing our principles consciously, free from those binds of insecurity and illusion.
A continuous process.
Something to really think about. Until next time, keep diving deep.